Thank you very much, Archie. Thank you very much, Sydney. I'm just going to share my screen. Well, I'll just talk a moment or two before I do. So thank you very much for the warmth of your welcome. It's lovely to see so many of you on, many people I've seen before and have met when we've been doing events at Leamington Station, such as the Remembrance Service each year, which I'm very pleased to see the Friends continuing to do. Archie is right. I was very proud indeed of working for Chiltern Railways. I grew up at Knowle and Dorridge and was born when it was still in Warwickshire. I was exceedingly proud to be director of my bit of the Great Western Railway that came through Dorridge and Solihull. And I think Chiltern is something that we are all very proud of. Many of us who were directors of Chiltern Railways are now directors of SLC Rail, and we like to carry on those high standards in delivering what we're doing. I'm also exceedingly proud to be president of the Friends of Leamington Station. Archie, Marianne, and all of the team have done an amazing job. I always say, you know, when it says the Country Life Best Garden of the Year, I often say, isn't it the best railway garden or the best small garden or the best big garden, the best garden of the year in Britain? I mean, a fantastic achievement, but also what's been most important about the Friends of Leamington Station is that all of those beautiful cosmetic and aesthetic things that the Friends have done have also brought real benefits to real passengers. If you look at all those lovely Great Western Railway benches on the station, that actually just was not only beautiful, but it provided more space for more passengers to sit down whilst they waited for their trains. And I think that's been one of the great things about the Friends of Leamington Station. So I greatly commend the work that's been done over those years. Archie is right. I think it was 2004 when I came. My parents, who are sadly long dead now, but they came to Leamington to hear that talk. So I always remember them fondly making their way from Dorridge Station on the train to Leamington in order to come to that talk. So thank you very much. And what I will now do, if you could just bear with me whilst I just share the screen, I'm going to take you through some thoughts about HS2, because I think that will be of interest to you. Some thoughts about the implications of COVID-19. And as I always try to do, also to just finish off with some few thoughts about God's wonderful railway as well, just to give us some further colour. Now, I'm hoping that that has now come up for you all. Let me just... Right, can everybody see that all right? Is that okay? Good, okay. And I've taken a bit of Bridget Riley to give some of the impressions of so I'm just trying to see if I can just hide. That's better. Right. So yes, I started off with trying to find some of those modernistic images that Bridget Riley produced in the 1960s and just blend them together with modernity on the top left and God's wonderful railway on the bottom right. And as Archie said, I was a guard and I am a signalman at the Severn Valley Railway, but I was also a guard on vintage trains and used to guard that very locomotive, Earl of Mount Edgecombe, on those very coaches as they would go between Birmingham, Snow Hill, Moor Street and Stratford upon Avon. And there was an object lesson I had one day. Train left Snow Hill Station on a winter's day, and the steam was coming out of all the pipes on the coaches, and the coach in front of me was a dining car, and everyone was dining with their roast beef, and I was wearing my Great Western Railway uniform as the guard. And we arrive into Birmingham Moor Street, and a young man just comes up to me and he says, "All right, mate, is this the train to Marylebone?" And he had completely missed that it was a steam train or anything like that. And it was an object lesson for me, because a train is a train is a train, and people want to go places and get where they need to go. So I'm very filled with love and nostalgia for the old railway, but the railway is ultimately a means to an end rather than an end in itself. And I think that's what I want to talk about most of this evening. So I'm going to start with HS2, and I'm going to take you through a few photographs first, and then I am probably going to work you a bit hard, but I hope it will prove useful and helpful to you in understanding some of the machinations of the thinking about railways and what HS2 is there to do. Well, I know that on my news feed, only today there's a very sad thing on the web which says the Cubbington pear tree was a wild pear tree, close to you in Warwickshire, and it was removed for HS2 only a few days ago, and I gather it was been there for about 250 years and was the second largest wild pear tree in the country, and had been voted England's Tree of the Year in 2015. And in a sense, it does sum up one of the aspects of and the challenges of HS2 and all major railways that have happened since the 19th century, that they do impinge upon things that we take to be valuable. And it's probably unsurprising, therefore, that people were actually very opposed to HS2. I think it would be hard to live in a place directly affected by HS2 and not feel challenged by it. Just to sort of remind ourselves about what HS2 is about, it's about two routes, as you can see here on this slide, from London up to Birmingham, HS2 phase 1, and then extensions up towards Crewe and Manchester to the northwest of England, and then to the East Midlands and on to Sheffield and Leeds. And at the moment we have the authorisation from government for the first of these components to be built from London to Birmingham. It's interesting, if you see HS2's more recent map, it does actually show its connectivity to the East Coast Main Line up to Newcastle and the West Coast Main Line up to Glasgow and Edinburgh, and begins to show how it fits into that wider and extensive sort of inter-city network across the whole of Great Britain, touching onto England and Scotland, and at the western side at Liverpool in effect close to Wales. But let's just think a bit about what it's going to achieve, and I'm going to take you through some photographs here, really partly just to give us some aesthetics, quality of places, but I just want to think about London and think about Euston Station with the arch that was sadly removed. It was an elegant and airy station. It had a splendid Great Hall, which sadly I never saw, partly because, of course, this happened to it when the West Coast Main Line was rebuilt. And so rather like the pear tree, when one compares the loss of this, this was a great tragedy. And the workmen who destroyed the Doric Arch had to work very hard to do so. And then what we have had since has been much more, I suppose, Spartan. It was probably ambitious in the 1960s, but less engaging architecturally than the old Euston, with the space for the arch sat there, as you can see. But it's interesting that the people now are quite enthused at the notion, whether it will ever happen, of putting back the arch and seeing it as part of really what will be a fundamentally transformed form of accessibility to the national railway network that Euston will represent. And you'll see what I mean about this in a moment or two, because I'm just going to move on. Some of you may have seen the wonderful photographs of a photographer called John Gay, who did a series of amazing photographs, always in black and white, of Britain in the 1960s. And this is a classic. You will probably recognise that as St Pancras, something just so perfect in his ability to see things differently. And that was the inside of the St Pancras Hotel. Again, black and white, probably telling more than colour does, although the colour, of course, of St Pancras is rather amazing. And inside Eurostar to Europe, as well as the national network up to Leicester and Nottingham and Derby and Sheffield. And, you know, a very patent and clear part of our clarity of our relationship with Europe, which is a nice colourful picture there. And then I just want to finish in London with, for reasons I'll explain again, as I say in a moment, with King's Cross. What a remarkable station of the Great Northern Railway. When you go in it now, this is the new concourse that was opened in the last decade. Rather remarkable architecture, just goes to show that modern architecture can be as dramatic and effective as older architecture. It can change in its colours, rather amazingly. Here, it strikes me, delivered by Network Rail, and you know, actually indicative of what railways are about, which is helping these large numbers of people get to where they want to go. But what is it about those large numbers of people that HS2 is potentially going to change? Well, what it's going to do is it's actually going to mean that most of the people who today, let's talk pre-COVID-19 for the time being, who today travel to the north of England, to Scotland, to the Midlands, to the East Midlands, the Northwest, and so on, those people who currently go to the current Euston, the current St Pancras, and the current King's Cross will more than likely be going to the HS2 station at Euston to make those long distance strategic journeys across the United Kingdom. And rather stunning, HS2's designs for it, that it will be. This will be a transformative access point from London and the southeast to those parts of the country, and a stunning gateway to London for those people from those parts of the country. But this is where I'm now going to try and work you hard. And I hope you'll find this illuminating. It's something I didn't understand. What Archie hasn't said to you is that I am a social worker. In fact, I was a child protection social worker for the first 20 years of my career in Oxford. And that was a gruesome job, as you can imagine. And I became a railwayman when I was 40, and I'm in my mid-60s now. So that was a while ago. And I had to learn a lot about the way railways work that I had no real understanding of at all. And what I want to illuminate to you is that HS2 creates dramatic new capacity on the current railway network by enabling those longer distance trains to the northwest, the northeast, Scotland, and so on, to go on HS2 rather than them having to use the current railway lines. And I want to give you a local example. I'm not going to use a Chiltern one because it doesn't work in quite the same way. But I want to illustrate the impact of HS2 on the Coventry to Birmingham part of the railway, so not far from us all in Warwickshire. So what this is, this diagram is what's called a train diagram. And what you see down on the left-hand side of the screen is the stations going from Birmingham down to Coventry. And what you see in the chart is an hour, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and so on. And what you see in those lines, those are each trains. So if you take the black one, that's number 1, that is a cross-country train that runs from Manchester down to Birmingham, through Coventry, to you at Leamington, and then down to Southampton. Each of the red trains is what was currently called Avanti, the old Virgin trains, which are the 3 trains an hour that run from Birmingham to Euston and are the fast expresses. The green trains are the local trains. As you can see, they stop at lots of stations, at the Marston Greens and the Berkswells and the Tile Hills and so on. And there's one other outlying one, which is the blue one, which is the Aberystwyth to Shrewsbury and Birmingham International train service. And so this tells you just sort of how those trains work and how much space there is between them. What you can see is if you take that number 3, the green one, you see how much space it takes up on the graph because it's stopping at all those stations. So it just gives you a visual indication of how many trains run between Birmingham and Coventry, where they stop, and how they take up the space on the tracks in effect. Second thought is, if you look at the blue circles or the blue ovals, they tell you where there's the only space, really, the only gaps in the graph to allow more trains to run. Or if you look at it a different way, you could say they either create or they block space. Now you'll see those 2 blocks of space on the underneath the 20 that are in red. They block the space up because if you look at the one that's at the top, you see that there's nearly 20 minutes between trains leaving Birmingham New Street. Green number 3 leaves just after 10 minutes past the hour, and then red number 4 doesn't leave until 30 minutes past the hour. The reason for that is if you tried to put another train in there, it would simply catch up the green train and have to sit behind it. Or if you tried to send a fast train a couple of minutes after the green train, it would not be able to get to Coventry any quicker. And you can see at the bottom, those 2 trains arrive at Coventry very close to each other. The point being that even the space that's actually in the graph is not easy to add more trains to. The same is also true if you think about the blue train. You could extend it to Coventry. There's green space, you could get there. But why would you do it? Because if you were to extend it, then all it would do, it would mean there was one more train. You see 4, 5, 6 and 7 all leave Birmingham within a few minutes of each other. It would be no value in particularly sending it to Coventry, especially when train number 8, the red one, would get there only 2 or 3 minutes after it. So even the space that's on the graph is not easy to use for more trains. And that's the blue extension. You can see, why would anyone get on a train at 35 minutes past the hour to get to Coventry just 2 or 3 minutes before one that left at 50 minutes past the hour? With HS2, there is a fundamental opportunity to change what happens between Birmingham and Coventry, because the proposition with HS2 is rather than 3 Virgin Avanti trains, 3 red ones running every hour, you reduce that to 2, because there will be a sizable proportion who currently use Coventry to go to Euston. He'll go to Birmingham interchange and use HS2 to go to London. Now, Coventry still wants its 3 trains per hour. It's a big political decision. But this just illustrates what, if it were reduced to 2 fast trains an hour to London, what could happen. And what actually happens is that you then are able to have 2 cross-country services, because there isn't room for them at the moment, the 2 black trains every hour. And both of those come through you at Leamington. The one goes Reading, Leamington, Birmingham, Newcastle, and it goes via Solihull because it can't be fitted in to go via Coventry. If we reduce the number of Virgin Avanti trains to 2 per hour, it frees up the space for that second cross-country service, allowing Coventry, Birmingham International, to be connected to Derby, Chesterfield, Sheffield, York, Darlington, Durham, Newcastle by direct trains, which they're currently not connected to now. It also does this. Currently, there are 7 trains an hour that can fit in between Coventry and Birmingham New Street. It increases the ability of the line to accommodate 9 trains per hour instead of 7 between Coventry and Birmingham. And it increases the ability to run 10 trains per hour between Birmingham International and Birmingham New Street, up from 9. So the key message, and I'm conscious it's quite a complex structure, but the key message is simply by HS2 creating additional space on the current railway, you can see that just on that corridor, more trains can run, more regional trains, more local trains, more long distance trains. And so that's replicated across the whole of the urban networks, really, of the West Midlands and of places like Manchester. And so the West Midlands Rail Executive, which is the amalgam of all the counties in the West Midlands, Warwickshire included, Coventry, Worcestershire, Staffordshire, the West Midlands Urban Authorities, it has a 30-year rail strategy that specifically is able to see more trains in the local areas to Wolverhampton, to Worcester, to Lichfield, down to Leamington and so on, that is created by the new capacity that becomes available when HS2 happens. My take on it would be that prior to COVID-19, the railway was full. And without HS2, we would be saying on many routes, there is nothing more that we can do. Going back to the diagrams you've seen before, what we would be saying in effect was, sorry, we can't run 9 trains per hour between Coventry and Birmingham. We're stuck with 7. Sorry, we can't run any more local services between Birmingham International and Birmingham New Street. We can only run what is there now. So HS2 is game changing. And it's seen more widely. It's just the month before last, Midlands Connect, which is a bigger umbrella organisation that covers the West Midlands and the East Midlands, has specifically been, as you can see from that title, looking at maximising the benefits of HS2 to the East Midlands and the connectivity between the West Midlands and the North East of England. And Manchester, for example, their transport strategy similarly is premised on HS2 releasing major capacity that will free up places like Manchester Piccadilly and free up stations like Leeds, allowing more local railway services to happen. You will often hear people saying, well, we should stop HS2 and spend all the money on the current railway, which is an easy and attractive concept. The problem with it is, although I at Chiltern, we've come from a background of all the track doubling and building Warwick Parkway and so on and so forth. If we wanted, for example, to really change the West Coast Main Line through Coventry, we might have to look at thinking about how we rebuilt Coventry Station when it's actually hemmed in by houses. We'd have to think about whether we quadrupled the track between Birmingham International and Birmingham New Street. Again, when we'd have to take probably many people's houses away if we did that. And we'd also have to try to do it whilst running the railway. So it would be a very challenging thing to do. So my summary on HS2 is that it releases regional capacity on today's network for more trains like the Reading, Leamington, Coventry, Newcastles. It releases more capacity to better connect, for example, places like Coventry and Milton Keynes. There's 1 fast train an hour at the moment from Coventry to Milton Keynes and 3 very slow ones that go via Rugby and Northampton. The potential to get 2 trains of fast trains an hour, for example, between Birmingham International, Coventry and Milton Keynes being one of the fastest growing cities in the UK, comes out of HS2. It secondly releases local capacity on today's network, which otherwise will not be free. And it thirdly better connects North, Central and Southern England. The notion that it's just about getting people fast to and from London is actually not a plausible concept to me. I think it's probably unfortunate that it was called High Speed 2. It's really new capacity 2, or new capacity 1, actually. That's what it really is. And I think Chiltern actually rather well exemplifies what better connectivity actually provides, because I think for Leamington and Warwick and Solihull, it's been transformative, not only in its connectivity towards London, but towards Birmingham. I think it's created places like Bicester in a massively growing and amazingly vibrant town. When I went to university in 1976, Bicester was a town of 10,000 people. It's about to be about 80,000, and it's vibrant and very economically effective. So HS2 is transformative. Now, before I go to COVID-19, I'm going to give you a break before we go on to COVID-19. My summation about will HS2 happen? Well, it is happening now, as in phase 1, and you will know that Boris Johnson announced that earlier in the year, and it will happen. What will happen on phase 2 is more difficult to be certain about. Phase 2A, going up to Crewe and connecting to Manchester, is part of that is already included in phase 1, and that's up to Crewe. But the extensions to Manchester and to Sheffield and Leeds remain a subject of debate, both in their own right, intrinsically, and of course, because we're facing a major challenge economically because of the cost of COVID-19.